this is a really great presentation, and it's really nice to see this wagon appear in ready-to-run form in O gauge. Hi there to you, it's really great to see you. I hope I find you well. I'm Jennifer Kirk, welcoming you back to the channel up here in the loft on Weir Yard. And today we're going to be taking a look at some O gauge wagons that have recently been released. This is all new tooling, and actually it's not just one wagon, but it's two different versions of the Vanwide, and these have been brought to the market by Dapol. And those of you who are familiar with this type of wagon, it's one of the last of the 10-foot wheelbase vacuum braked vans, and it was built in response to changing market conditions. So a lot of companies were looking to load and unload wagons in differing ways as things like palletization came through into the wider workplace. And an awful lot of the older wagons really weren't that suitable for this new, less labour-intensive way of handling goods. So British Rail built the Vanwides with a new type of sliding doors to be able to accommodate this traffic as it grew. Now, of course, air braking was something that British Rail then, throughout the 1970s, started to standardise on. That kind of left those vacuum brake wagons behind. Now, I think BR would have been quite happy to be rid of them if it wasn't for the fact that quite a few of their customers had older premises with very tight curved track within that just couldn't accommodate the longer wheelbase vans that were being built brand new to be air braked. So that meant that they turned to those Vanwide wagons that still had a lot of life left in them and completely upgraded the chassis and suspension and the braking system on a number of them to be able to continue to service some of those older customers. And actually they were really successful at this and carried on into the 1990s in this role when they were finally phased out, although the Ministry of Defence, amongst others, did actually buy an awful lot of them to continue using as internal users. And if you go to somewhere like Longmarston or Bicester, it may even be possible to see a few examples still lingering on. But with the generosity of Dapol, who very kindly sent over one each of both of the different versions of these wagons, and with additional support provided by Train-O-Matic, makers of DCC decoders and accessories that are designed by enthusiasts for enthusiasts, and of course in association with Billy's replacement speakers, taking your aural experience all the way to 11, let's take a closer look at these all-new wagons in O gauge from Dapol. Once upon a time, O gauge was very much the preserve of the wealthier modeller, or at least the modeller who was very, very capable at doing an awful lot of kit making and scratch building, but certainly deep pockets didn't go amiss. Now this all changed when Dapol started to bring out their ready-to-run O gauge wagons and locomotives. And I'm really, really grateful to Dapol for sending over their newest pair of releases. Now these two are very closely linked, and the reason that these are linked is that one of these is the original build of the wagon, which was then later rebuilt for a very specific purpose, but we'll get to that as we go through the review. And these are the Vanwide wagons. So we've got first up here 7F-049-201, and this is the Vanwide 12-ton goods van in freight brown. It does say VEA, but I think that's not quite right, and we'll come to that in the review. The second wagon that Dapol have very kindly sent over for review is 7F-049-004, and this is the VEA 12-ton goods van Vanwide in the grey with yellow ends. So it comes in the pretty standard Dapol boxes, and I'm going to put the VEA to one side initially and just concentrate on this one. It's a really great hard wearing packaging. We have covered that in previous videos, and the wagon itself is protected by the clamshell inside. And as you can see here, it is coded VEV, not VEA, as it says on the box, but it's just a minor thing. And originally these were built as pretty much the final progression of the ventilated type vans, the short 10-foot wheelbase wagons. And they were, I guess, a development from the VEV coded wagons that were far, far more numerous. Now, the reason for these was that British Rail, in light of feedback from customers, found that actually what customers wanted was a wagon that was able to have the doors opened without fouling loading docks or buildings. So to this end, we've got the slide out and along type doors, probably much more similar to things like the sliding side doors that you see on things like Ford Transits now. But also the doors themselves were wide enough that you could get a forklift truck in, and palletization was the other big thing that was occurring across industry at the time. We were having containerization, but the palletization really did speed up the actual moving around of products. It reduced the amount of manpower required. You didn't need to stack and restack boxes. That in turn meant that products were less likely to get damaged in transit. But the railways kind of were lagging behind in this area, and certainly a lot of the wagons weren't suited to this palletized traffic. And BR tried with the PAL vans, which did suffer from rough riding because being loaded from one end did tend to mean that if they were only partially loaded, they would end up being overweight on one axle, and that could lead them to being prone to derailments. Now, the Vanwide was far more successful because with the centre loading doors, it encouraged loading evenly from either end, and that did mean that they ran much better. The model itself really does ooze charm and has a lot of detail. The roof, I think, does just slide out. There we go. So we do have access to the interior, which is great if you want to add in any kind of ballast weight. Really easy to do. And that just slots into place. It's an all plastic design, and actually it does seem to have used some really quite clever moulding to be able to make sure that actually it minimizes the amount of additional assembly that is required. We do have these separate metal wire handrails on the doors, and they do look really, really good. And I'm also particularly impressed with the correctly modelled sliding rails on the top and the bottom as well, which were the tracks that the doors ran in when they were opened and closed, that enabled them to be flush to the sides when shut, but would just gain enough space that they could then slide past the rest of the wagon and then allow forklift traffic in and out of the wagon. The model features the pressed steel ends, and these have this kind of corrugated effect, very reminiscent of the later build van wagons that were on the BR system. And then we've actually got the ventilator there, which does include, it's not a solid piece, it is actually as per what the prototype would have been, and these were to allow a degree of airflow for ventilation into the wagon, but also protecting from ingress of rain and water. We've also got separately applied plates here. These would have been for cards that would have gone in, which would have given some details about destination for the wagon, so that when it was being marshalled and shunting, it was easy to work out where the wagon needed to be routed. The underframe is where a lot of the detail is happening on this Dapol wagon, and we've got this really quite complex and prototypically accurate brake rigging that is factory fitted with a full vacuum cylinder in there. It's detailed. Every way you look at it, it is fully detailed. And we've got these clasp brakes on the wheel, which is something that a lot of wagons should have, but certainly we've come used to in 00 them to be lacking on quite a lot of the models that come through, but not so on this wagon. In O gauge, it really does look great. W irons, we've got air gaps where it needs to be, and these springs are actually really nicely moulded in there. I do like all of this complex, the gussets and the door tracks all fit in really nicely along the sides here, and we've got the correct profile of the chassis rails as well. All four of the buffers are fully sprung loaded, and again, These are absolutely necessary in O gauge. So whilst I'm not a fan of sprung buffers in 00, in O gauge it's absolutely essential. And this is because the wagons use the 3-link or the instanter type couplings, which do then mean that you tend to run them buffer to buffer, and the buffers then do need to be able to spring for the train to run properly. It's also another reason why in O gauge you do need to have far more generous curves, and you can't get away with the train set style curves that we've kind of got used to in the smaller scales. Separately applied detail keeps going. We've got these lamp irons, and these are metal, on the buffer beams. The coupling drawbar hook is spring loaded because these couplings are the couplings that you use, so it is absolutely necessary for them to have some degree of spring to them. And then we've also got the vacuum pipe on there as well, which you can see all factory fitted, and it really is a delight when you look at this model. The weight on this as well is pretty good, and certainly when I've had this running on my O gauge little diorama layout, it has held the track incredibly well, helped no doubt by the very clever design that Dapol have in these chassis that gives a degree of compensation between the two axles. And you can see when I press down on that side, the other wheel does move in the opposite direction, which actually means that it's able to kind of undulate over any imperfections in the track work, which does mean that this doesn't tend to cock a wheel, which is quite important because in O gauge as well we do have far more scale flanges. These wheels are pretty nicely free running. In terms of the printing on the side, well, the wagon itself is finished in the prototypical freight bauxite, and this is actually a really good representation of the colour. I can't really see anything wrong with that. A little bit of a black dirty wash would really help on this, I think, because it would bring out all of the detail. But certainly as well, we've got the printing for the TOPS data panel, really sharp, really crisp, and you can see there, the closer you get to it, there's no fuzziness going on there. We've also got the XP branding. Earlier wagons, I'm sure, had XP written in that, but I think later on it just got simplified, and that basically meant that this wagon could run at a faster speed. Then we've got, again, some really nice detail there on the, I think that's to do with overhaul dates, and then we've also got some extra detail to do with the tear and gross weight of the wagon, plus the wheelbase, 10 foot 0 inches. The door opening mechanism, it's actually moulded on, but in such a way that it looks like it could be wire. It's really sharp focused. The rivet detail too, and these straps on the side of the wagon, which the prototypes would have been plywood construction, it's really captured it well. And a smooth side such as this could quite easily have looked a bit peculiar in model form, but Dapol have managed to get what appears to be an ever so slight texture, possibly even in the paint finish, using that paint finish to the advantage, and it does look just like the prototype wagon. All in all, this is a really great presentation, and it's really nice to see this wagon appear in ready-to-run form in O gauge, and certainly it leaves 00 modelers somewhat envious, because to see this is really superb, and it is certainly a wagon that we're currently missing in 00, although it is announced from another manufacturer. We've yet to see those models appear. I'm going to move over to the VEA. Now, the reason that Dapol have very generously sent both of these over for review at the same time is that the VEA was a rebuild of some of the VEV Vanwides. Now, the reason for this was that the air brake network on British Rail was expanding. They were looking to start to dispense with vacuum braked rolling stock and standardise on air braked only. But there were still a lot of customers whose track work in their premises was too tight for the extended wheelbase vans. So we had the VAA, VBA, VCA and VDA wagons, And they were a much longer wheelbase to make more efficient use of the space and to have a higher payload weight that they could carry. But there were still these customers, and the military was a big user of these because they had older premises with tighter curves that were perfect for the 10-foot wheelbase wagons, but couldn't handle those longer wheelbase vans. So to that end, British Rail took some of the still fairly new Vanwide wagons, building on the fact that these were perfect for palletized loading with a forklift truck, and had them rebuilt. And the reason for this was to give them all new suspension and braking system to allow them to run in the air brake trains. And these, along with a single type of open wagon as well, formed the kind of legacy backbone within the air brake fleet. Now, as you can see here, Dapol have tooled up two completely different chassis. And I'm just going to hold these together. And you can see that we've got completely different suspension linkage on there. The wheels are the same, but that's really where it ends. And everything underneath the sole bar on the VEA is completely different. You can see the air cylinders, all of that linkage on there. And this is actually superb to see the attention to detail that Dapol have done here to fully capture everything that is different of the VEA rebuild over the VEV. This is not just a warmed over livery change, this really is a fully tooled new model. Again, just like we saw with the Vanwide, we've got that removable roof which allows the inside to be accessed to then be able to add in any ballast if you want to add any ballast. And you can see there that we've got, I actually quite like the way they've done that. The roof is painted yellow on the inside so that when it's all put in, you have that very narrow yellow band along the top, and it comes out really, really nice and neat. Everything else on the top part of these wagons appears to be much the same in terms of the detail. We've got those separately applied handrails, although they're not picked out in white on this version. This carries the rail freight distribution livery, which has this kind of dark slate grey with the full yellow ends. A very eye-catching livery of the sectorization period, and certainly Dapol have captured this livery incredibly well. It's very easy to make the yellow ends look a bit weird on models, but actually they've done it really well. I do like the crisp application of the rail freight distribution logos with the diamonds within squares. We've got the silver fox in the lozenge there, and then the whole tops plate as well is nicely done in this stencil style that became so common as BR sought to improve efficiency on wagon painting and also to standardize on font. So they just have a stencil and they'd either, I guess, just splash over it with a white paintbrush or even spray cans, I guess, later on. Everything is super sharp, and this livery actually has so much more to see in there. Really, really nice. And some of the lettering is so fine, but we can fully read all of that. On the buffer beams, we've got the instanter couplings now, and then we've got the air pipes on the buffer beam. We've still got that lamp bracket, of course. On air brake trains, there's no brake fan, so probably much less used, but I guess why take them off if they're already there? The buffers are still fully sprung, still very important for O-gauge running, but I really do love all of this detail. I'm just seeing whether the handbrake lever can be posed. We saw that on the conflat. I don't want to force it, but certainly it is all separately applied detail, and it really does look great. So overall, a really nice pair of wagons, and it gives a great deal of variety for your wagon fleet in O-gauge, and also means that from the 1960s all the way through to the 1990s, Dapol has versions of these wagons to cover all of the different phases of operation. This particular version would be suitable for probably mid-70s through into the 1980s. This version is very firmly 1980s into the very much the twilight of these wagons' uses in the 1990s. Some of these wagons were then sold on and became internal users, particularly the MOD at places like Bicester would have used these as internal users within quite vast sites. So it's still possible to see some of these kind of still clinging on in use at some Ministry of Defence facilities. It also meant that a lot of these wagons were available, because they were quite long lasting, to pass on into the preservation scene, so you can still see them out there on preserved lines, usually being used as covered storage. When it comes to running characteristics of these wagons, they really held the track well. The track on my little O-gauge diorama layout isn't really the best laid. The baseboards are completely recycled, and actually I didn't clean them up very well, so the track itself has quite some twists and turns in them, and the point 2 is one of the set track points, and that does tend to prove somewhat more of a challenge when items roll over it. Notwithstanding that, the wagons really did perform very, very well, and really there's almost nothing that can be faulted with their performance on the track. So we come now to the scores. First up is build quality, and actually I've handled these extensively and they are really, really well put together. None of the detail on the underside is loose, and in fact, even when I really do put them to the test, these are actually really well made and robust, which is quite important. There's some really great use of metal parts and also springy plastic, which means that the correct material is used in all places to get the very best out of this model. Everything about it really just holds together well. The couplings too are robust, which is great because these are what you're going to be using to be able to pull this wagon as part of a train. Even the vacuum pipes are actually really well fastened, and there's no real risk of these just coming out and mysteriously losing themselves on your track. The buffers too, with their turned metal heads, that spring is powerful enough to be perfectly usable in this scale, but they're not loose at all. Everything here is really robust, and it's certainly an area that Dapol really have taken the lead in this senior scale. The door runners are separately applied parts on the bottom, and again, really, really secure. Handrails too, they are really handling all that I can throw at them, and really there's just nothing that I can fault. So I'm going to give these a 10 out of 10. On running quality, we've already touched on that. They rolled through my slightly dubious track work really quite well, and actually I had no problems whatsoever with derailments. The only areas where some of the motion did seem to be a bit rocky is through that Pico set track point, but that really is a challenge for everything. So overall, I'm going to give these a 9.5 out of 10. DCC fitting isn't applicable, but certainly on innovation, I really do love the method of construction that Dapol are using. They have plenty of separately fitted detail, but only where it's absolutely necessary, and there is really clever use of moulded on detail, especially for a lot of the van top, which means that they're not wasting money on labour to assemble bits and pieces that are just as well represented with moulded on detail. I particularly love this door locking mechanism that looks as good as if it could be there with a piece of wire, but actually it is part of the moulding. It's really, really well done, and I'm going to give this a 9.2. When it comes to accuracy and quality of finish, again, this is another stellar product from Dapol. The colours themselves do come across really accurate. I think wagons are always something that benefit from a dirty black washover. It's just something, it brings out the detail and certainly tones down some of the colours. But these match all the photographs I've seen of the real wagons, and certainly the sharpness of the finish really is great. What I particularly like is the attention to detail on the two very different underframes, and both of these have been captured perfectly, providing wagons that are suitable for the air brake conversion and the original vacuum brake models. There's no real similarity other than the wheels between these two, and it just really does show that Dapol have gone above and beyond, and I'm going to give this a 9.9. On value for money, this is another strong point for Dapol. These come in for just a shade under £50 when I've been having a look around, and I've got an affiliate link in the description box to take you to Rails of Sheffield to be able to pick these up. Be warned though that the rail freight distribution VEA vans are starting to sell out really quick, and Dapol did tell me that they are completely sold out from the factory, so if you want those particular ones you really do need to get your skates on. It's a similar price to what the ordinary vans that they produced in the same scale some time ago came out at, and this is a really great addition to the more numerous but earlier vans, and certainly carries over to the later diesel period and into the immediate period before privatisation. That really does mean that these vans are an excellent choice for a whole range of modelers. Certainly if you were to buy a kit, build it, get the wheels, paint it and finish it, certainly you would really struggle to get a finish even half as good as this, but I don't think you're going to come out of it with that much of a saving, if at all, and certainly if you have to pay somebody else to make the kit, then really this is the only option for you. Dapol have really made O-gauge totally affordable, and as we see prices going up in the smaller scales, actually I find myself looking more and more at O-gauge and thinking that it bizarrely now offers far better value for money than we see from the smaller scales, and that is a total reversal from the situation even just 5 or 10 years ago. So I'm going to give these a 10 out of 10 for value for money. And that gives us a grand total of 48.6. Again, another high scoring wagon in O-gauge from Dapol. Well, I hope you really enjoyed that video review of these all new wagons, and I'd love to hear from you in the comments section down below if these are wagons that you've got on your own railway and want to share your experiences of them. Likewise, if there's something that you think that I've missed in this review, do leave a comment down below. I'd love to hear from you, and I do read every single comment. And it's also a great place to pick up a little bit of extra information by reading through the comments, and of course it's the best way of getting a full honest appraisal, to not just listen to what I had to say, but to read what others had to say about their own experiences with these wagons. Please also consider liking this video, sharing it as well to let other people know, and also if you haven't already done so, do please subscribe to the channel to be the first to know about new videos as and when they come up. We've got those affiliate links in the description box down below, and you'll also see our merch store, so do please check that out. But until next time, this is me, Jenny Kirk, saying you take great care of yourself. Bye for now. Today's video is sponsored by Trainomatic, makers of DCC decoders designed to be fully compatible with every manufacturer's locomotive. Visit train-o-matic.com to browse the full range and see what they've got suitable for you. I'd like to send out a huge thanks to everybody who supports me on Patreon, and an extra special huge thanks goes out to Anthony Kidson, Offshore Allen, Michael Lockie, Helen Sink, Gary Lewis, David Quinn, Sparky 107107, George Botterini, Chris Moss, Robert Steers, MD of San Juan Model Company and Grantline Products, Sam Yates, Dale Williams, John N from NC, NYMRish, Jonathan Foster, Peter, Clifford Ison, Larry W. Grant, NI Railways 4000 class, Ian Coulson, and Alan Dickerson. Thank you. Without you guys, I couldn't do this.